On the drive back from London recently, we stopped at Fleet Services, and there on the floor by the entrance was a hopscotch game. Painted squares, numbers, the whole thing. A few months ago, I would have walked straight past it. Not because I didn't notice it, because I would have been too aware of who was around, too conscious of how I would look, too committed to not being the person who hops a children game in the middle of a service station. This time, I hopped it. That's the whole story. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody clapped. My wife joined in and did it too. And I carried on to the car feeling something that I want to try and describe properly in this video. Because that moment, as small and slightly ridiculous as it sounds, was the most visible expression of something that had been shifting in me for a while. Something that I want to talk about today. Something I think a lot of you will recognize, even if you've never thought about it in these terms before. Welcome to the Lead Word channel, where we explore the inner world of leadership, well-being, and what it means to build a business and a life that doesn't break you. My name's Trevor. I run a multi-award-winning cocktail bar and restaurant, but I didn't come from a hospitality background. I built the business from the ground up, learning as I went, figuring it out in real time. I was on holiday recently and I came across a book called Stand Out Hospitality by Cassie Davidson. A couple of paragraphs stopped me cold, not because they told me something I didn't know, because they named something I've been living with for years without ever having a word for it. This video is about that. About the slow, quiet process by which you can hand your personality off to the people and situations around you without ever making a conscious decision to do so. About what it does to your confidence, your leadership, and your relationship with yourself. And about what it feels like when you finally start taking it back. The idea that landed for me was this. Imagine walking into a room of 10 people wanting them all to like you. So you moderate, you soften a few opinions, you tone down the parts of yourself that might be too much, you laugh in the right places and nod along and work hard to be agreeable. They think you're nice, polite, pleasant, but the conversation moves around you. People aren't that interested. You're there, but you're not really present. You leave feeling accepted, but not remembered. Now imagine walking into the same room and being fully yourself, clear, honest, not performing, not pretending, not holding back. A couple of people don't get you. A few decide that maybe you're not for them. Maybe you only really connect with 2 out of that 10, but those 2 stay and listen. They feel something resonate. You're at the center of the conversation, not because you're trying to be, but because you're saying something that matters. When I read that, I felt it physically because I recognized myself immediately in the first version, not as an occasional thing, as a pattern. A deeply ingrained, years-long, mostly unconscious pattern of walking into rooms and making myself agreeable rather than making myself present. And the thing that makes it complicated, the thing that makes it so hard to see while you're inside it, is that none of it feels like a compromise when it's happening. It feels like being reasonable, being easy to get along with, being the kind of person that doesn't make unnecessary waves. It feels, from the inside, like a virtue. What I couldn't see was what it was costing me. I've always said that I don't care what people think of me. I believe that. I still believe it in the most important sense. The decisions I've made in my life, Mexico, Oco Rocco, the coaching work, none of those were made with one eye on what other people thought. I've taken risks that most people around me thought were too much. But when I read those paragraphs, I had to sit with something uncomfortable. The moderating I was doing in rooms, the adjusting, the letting other people's decisions and personalities prevail over mine because asserting my own felt like too much energy or too much risk for the relationships. The conversations I'd avoided because I didn't want to create a wave. The times I'd let things go at work that should have been addressed because addressing them would have made me out to be the difficult one. All of that is care about what people think, just with a different label on it. Calling it being reasonable, calling it picking my battles, calling it leadership, when actually it was a version of people pleasing that had been so thoroughly normalized, I'd stopped recognizing it as such. And the irony is sharp. The thing I thought I wasn't doing was the thing I was doing most consistently. Not in the big decisions, in the 1,000 small ones that accumulate quietly into a version of yourself that has been shaped entirely by the path of least resistance. Years ago, a friend got drunk at a gathering and did the thing that people do sometimes when they're going through something on their own. She went around the group and told everyone what she actually thought of them. Most of it was her own insecurities projected outward. It was uncomfortable. Everyone laughed it off afterwards and put it down to the drink. When she got to me, she called me insipid. I had to look it up. I'm not afraid to admit that. It means bland, tasteless, dull, lacking in flavour, spirit, or interest. I dismissed it immediately because it didn't match the person I knew myself to be, someone who had built things from nothing, taken risks that most people wouldn't have done, been single-minded enough to pursue something most people in my life thought was too uncertain. The word didn't fit, so I filed it away as the ranting of someone going through a difficult night, and I moved on. Except when those paragraphs landed in my lap on holiday. The word came back, and I could see for the first time how someone looking at the version of me that was moderating and adjusting and trying not to create waves would have seen that. Not the whole truth of me, but a visible pattern in me. A pattern that from the outside looked a lot like someone who wasn't quite there, who was present in the room but not available in the room, who was performing pleasantness rather than offering anyone anything real. I'm not giving the drunk woman credit for an accurate diagnosis. She was going through something of her own, and most of what she said that evening was aimed at herself rather than the people in the room, but the word came back for a reason, and the reason was that somewhere underneath the dismissal, I knew it had touched something. Reading those paragraphs was the moment that something became clear enough to look at directly. Here's how moderating happens, because I think it's important to name the mechanism rather than just the result. It doesn't happen in a single decision. It accumulates through 1,000 small ones, each of which feels entirely reasonable in the moment. You soften an opinion because the timing isn't right. You avoid a difficult conversation because the relationship is more important to you than the issue. You let someone else's preference stand because the energy required to assert your own isn't available right now. You don't hop on the hopscotch because someone might see you. Each of those moments is defensible. None of them are catastrophic, but over time they add up to a version of yourself that has been shaped by whatever caused the least friction rather than whatever is actually true. A personality that has defaulted to ease. And that version, however comfortable it feels from the inside, is not the version that leads. It's the version that gets led. The burnout and the dark years made this significantly worse. When the pressure is high and the reserves are low, the energy required to be fully yourself rather than the version that causes the least friction is often just not there. The moderating becomes more automatic. The path of least resistance becomes the only path that feels available. And what comes out the other side of years of that person that I described? Passive, dragged along, handing decisions off to whoever is willing to make them. Not because I was weak, because the habit had been building for long enough that it had started to feel like personality rather than pattern. There's a social anxiety connection here that I hadn't made until the book forced it. The trying not to stand out, not to create waves, not to be the center of the room. I thought that was about introversion of preference. What I can see now is that it was self-conscious that comes from performing a version of yourself rather than being one. When you're not quite being real, you're always slightly off balance, always slightly aware that the thing being received isn't quite the actual thing. And that awareness produces exactly the discomfort it was designed to avoid. Before I go any further, I want to mention my Lead Well community. It's a free space for hospitality founders where we have the conversations the industry doesn't usually make room for. If any of what I'm describing is landing, come and find us. The link's in the description and it's completely free. Let's get back to the video. Here's where I want to address something that comes up whenever people talk about deliberately changing who they are. The objection is that it's artificial, that consciously deciding to be different is denial of your authentic self, that manipulating your behavior is somehow less genuine than just being however you've always been. But here's what the argument misses. The version of yourself that you're protecting as authentic has already been shaped by manipulation. Social situations, important people, society, economic circumstances, education, your parents, a drunk woman at a party, a particularly hard few years. All of it has been working on you without your permission for your entire life. The person you are right now is the product of 1,000 external influences, none of which you consciously chose. So the choice isn't between authentic and artificial, it's between letting the shaping continue to happen to you or deciding to take the reins and to do it intentionally. Choosing who you want to be isn't a betrayal of who you are. It's the most honest thing that you can do because it's the first time the person doing the choosing is actually you. What happened to me over the difficult years was that the shaping happened in a particular direction. Pressure and the patterns I developed to manage it shaped me towards the moderating version, the path of least resistance version, the version that was accepted but not remembered. That shaping happened without my awareness, without my consent. It happened to me rather than by me. Taking it back, deliberately and consciously deciding to be more fully whatever I actually am isn't manipulation. It's just reclaiming the steering wheel from the set of circumstances that had been driving without me knowing. That reframe, when it landed, felt like permission, and permission is exactly what it was. I want to come back to where we started because the hopscotch is the thing. Not because it's significant in itself, because of what it represents about what's shifted. The old version of me would have seen it and kept walking, not out of indifference, out of self-consciousness. The awareness of the people around me and what they might think of a grown man hopping on a children's game in a service station entrance, the commitment to not standing out, the default to the version of myself that takes up the least space. The version that hopped it did so without thinking about it, or rather, thought about it for a second, noticed the thought and decided to do it anyway, because the decision to hop a hopscotch belongs entirely to me. It has no consequences, it serves no one's opinion, it's just a small, specific, slightly ridiculous expression of being someone who acts on the impulse to do something joyful rather than suppressing it for the comfort of invisibility. That sounds like nothing. I know it sounds like nothing, but the quality of that moment, the absence of the usual filter, was something I recognized as different. And it felt good in a way that is disproportionate to the act itself, like a small freedom, like the chain had been loosened, even just slightly, around the part of me that had learned to stay very still in rooms. I want to be clear about where I am with all of this. I'm not fixed. I'm not transformed. I haven't arrived anywhere permanent. The patterns that I've described didn't develop in a week, and they won't be undone in one either. This is ongoing work. Some days I do it well, and some days the old version shows up and defaults to ease before I've noticed it happening. But the awareness is there now in a way that it wasn't before. And awareness is where everything starts. You can't change what you can't see. And for the first time, I can see it clearly enough to work with it. I want to end with something I said in the notes I wrote about this experience, because I think it's one of the most honest things I've ever put into words and about what I do and why I do it. I've never claimed to be fixed. I've never claimed to be the person who has completed the journey and is now dispensing wisdom from the other side of it. What I've claimed and what I believe is that I'm far enough along to have a perspective that might be useful to someone who is still in the middle of it. None of the coaches and gurus have it all together either. That's not an insult, that's just the truth about being human. The ones worth listening to are the ones who are honest about that and who offer their experience as a route rather than a destination. Who can say, I've been where you are and here's how I navigated it and here's what I learned without pretending the navigation is over. What I can offer is a route out of where you are, a perspective on how to avoid going as dark as I went. A framework for pulling yourself out of the patterns that are running you without your awareness. Not because I've solved it, because I've lived it. And living it, even the worst of it, gave me something that no amount of reading or training or certification could have. It took a few chapters in a book on holiday to show me something that I should have seen years ago. It took a hopscotch game in fleet services to show me that something had shifted. It takes a million small decisions and a timeline that is entirely your own. But you can do it. The version of you that is fully yourself, inconvenient and specific and occasionally too much for some people in the room, is worth finding, because the 2 people who resonate with that version will matter infinitely more than the 8 who thought you were nice. And you deserve to be more than nice. We started with a hopscotch game at Fleet Services, which is either a very small thing or a very significant one, depending on where you're standing. What I hope you're taking from this is permission. The same permission that those paragraphs gave me on holiday. Permission to be the version of yourself that is fully present in the room rather than the one that is carefully managed for maximum acceptability. Permission to make decisions and own them. To say the thing that needs saying rather than the thing that causes the least friction. To hop on the hopscotch. The moderating has a cost. It produces comfort and invisibility in equal measure. And invisibility, however safe it feels, is not where the life you want to build actually lives. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like and a subscribe. It helps me, it helps the channel, and it helps people like us find the content that really matters. And as always, I'd love to remind you that you matter too. Don't forget that.